10 brutal ancient battles that changed the world. Before kings ruled nations, before empires rose and fell, there were battles so violent, so decisive, that they reshaped the future of humanity forever. Welcome to ImmortalChronos, the channel where ancient warriors, epic battles, and forgotten empires come alive. These were not just fights. They were turning points. Moments where a single decision, a single warrior, or a single charge determined the destiny of entire civilizations. Today, we uncover the ancient clashes soaked in blood, strategy, and sacrifice. Battles so brutal that the world you live in right now would look completely different if they had ended another way. Prepare yourself. History is about to reveal its darkest wars. 1. The Battle of Megiddo, 1457 BC. Long before the rise of Rome or Sparta, long before most civilizations even learned to write their own names, the battle erupted that would change the course of ancient history. It happened in 1457 BC, at a place that would later become legendary in myth and prophecy, Megiddo, the future Armageddon. At the center of this clash stood one of history's greatest warrior kings, Pharaoh Thutmose III, known as the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. He faced a massive rebellion of Canaanite city-states led by the powerful king of Kadesh. These weren't scattered rebels. This was a united front daring to challenge Egypt's supremacy. To reach Megiddo, Thutmose had 3 possible routes. 2 were safe, predictable, and expected. The third was a narrow mountain pass where only one chariot could move at a time, a perfect spot for an ambush and total disaster. His generals warned him to avoid it, but Thutmose III understood something the rebels did not. The enemy expects safety. They never expect genius. He took the dangerous route. When the Egyptians emerged from the mountains, the Canaanites were completely unprepared. Thutmose struck immediately. Egyptian infantry advanced in formation, while chariots thundered forward, unleashing volleys of arrows that shattered the enemy's lines. In panic, the Canaanites fled toward Megiddo's gates, but the narrow passage became jammed with soldiers, horses, and chariots. Many were trapped outside, cut down as Egyptian forces advanced. Egypt won the battlefield, but the city endured, so Thutmose built a wall around Megiddo and laid siege. After 7 months, starving and defeated, the rebels finally surrendered. Egypt reestablished control, and Thutmose became the architect of an empire. The Battle of Megiddo wasn't just Egypt's victory. It became the first recorded battle in human history. The moment's strategy, leadership, and bravery were written into the story of warfare forever. 2. The Battle of Thermopylae, for 80 BC. In the summer of 480 BC, the fate of the Western world balanced on a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. Here, a small band of Greek warriors prepared to face the largest invading force the ancient world had ever seen. The Persian army of King Xerxes, a force so massive that ancient writers claimed it drank rivers dry. Standing against this empire was a single city-state, Sparta, and its warrior king, Leonidas. He marched with just 300 Spartans, supported by several thousand Greek allies, united not by numbers, but by a conviction stronger than steel. Freedom or death. Thermopylae was chosen for one reason: the terrain. The narrow pass reduced the Persian numerical advantage. No matter how many soldiers arrived, only a few could fight at once. Leonidas knew that if Greece had any chance of stopping Xerxes, it would be here. When the battle began, Persian waves crashed against the Greek phalanx like a storm hitting a stone wall. Shields locked, spears thrust forward, and disciplined formations turned confined space into a killing ground. Persian infantry fell by the hundreds. Even the feared immortals, Xerxes' elite warriors, were forced back in shame. For 2 days, the Greeks held the line, but betrayal changed everything. A local shepherd revealed a hidden mountain path to the Persians, allowing them to flank the Greek position. Realizing the trap was closing, Leonidas dismissed most of the allied army to safety and stayed behind with his 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, and 400 Thebans, choosing death over surrender. Their final stand became legend. Surrounded on all sides, the Spartans fought until their spears broke, then with swords, and finally with their bare hands. They died to the last man, but their sacrifice ignited the spirit of Greece. Within a year, united Greek forces defeated the Persians at Salamis and Plataea. Thermopylae was not a victory of strength. It was a victory of courage, a battle that proved one truth. Sometimes a few brave hearts can inspire the world. 3. The Battle of Gaugamela, 331 BC. In the dusty plains of Gaugamela, under a blazing Mesopotamian sun, the destiny of the ancient world was about to be rewritten. On one side stood Darius III, ruler of the vast Persian Empire, a superpower stretching thousands of miles across continents. On the other, a young commander only 25 years old, driven by ambition, courage, and something bordering on destiny, Alexander the Great. This was not just another battle. It was a clash between two worlds, the old empire desperately holding on, and a rising force determined to reshape history. Darius arrived with an army that dwarfed Alexander's. Tens of thousands of infantry, chariots fitted with side blades, elite cavalry, and war elephants. He even ordered the battlefield leveled and smoothed so his chariots could roll like unstoppable blades through the Macedonian ranks. Alexander knew he couldn't win by fighting fairly. He had to outthink an empire. As dawn broke, the Macedonian phalanx advanced, long spears forming a deadly forest of points. But it was Alexander's cavalry, the legendary companion cavalry, that held the key. Instead of meeting the Persians head-on, Alexander performed a brilliant maneuver, a diagonal approach, slowly pulling his right flank outward. Darius believed the Macedonians were retreating. He saw a gap forming. He saw weakness. He was wrong. The gap was a trap, a corridor designed to pull Persian forces out of formation. And when that moment came, Alexander struck like lightning. With his companions beside him, Alexander charged straight at Darius himself. Dust erupted. Spears shattered, and the battlefield descended into chaos. Darius panicked, abandoned his chariot, and fled. The moment that shattered Persian morale. Without their king, the Persian army collapsed. Gaugamela was more than a victory. It was the fall of Persia, the rise of the Hellenistic world, and the moment Alexander became master of Asia. A single day, a single charge, a single young commander altering the course of human civilization forever. For the Battle of Cannae, 216 BC. In the blazing heat of an Italian summer in 216 BC, the Roman Republic faced a nightmare unlike anything in its history. The Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca, a tactical genius feared across the Mediterranean, was marching toward them with an army that Rome believed it could easily overwhelm. They were wrong, very wrong. To finally destroy Hannibal, Rome assembled one of the largest armies it had ever put in the field. Nearly 80,000 soldiers. Confident in their numbers, Roman commanders planned to crush the invaders through sheer force. Hannibal had fewer troops and no room for mistakes. But he had something Rome lacked, a mind built for war. On the wide, open plain near the town of Cannae, Hannibal carefully arranged his forces. He placed his weakest infantry in the center, a move so strange, Roman commanders assumed it was a gift. They charged straight forward, driving directly into Hannibal's formation. At first it worked. The Carthaginian center bent backward, then retreated, almost collapsing. The Romans surged forward, believing victory was moments away. But this was no collapse. It was a trap, the most devastating ambush in military history. As the Roman mass kept pushing inward, Hannibal's stronger African infantry curled around the flanks, closing the gap behind them. At the same time, his cavalry defeated the Roman horsemen and swept in from the rear. The Romans suddenly realized the horror. They were completely surrounded, trapped shoulder to shoulder with no room to move. They became victims of a slow, methodical massacre. Ancient historians wrote that the fields ran red for hours as over 50,000 Romans were killed. One of the bloodiest single days in ancient warfare. Cannae was more than a victory. It became the textbook example of perfect military strategy, a battle still studied by generals around the world today. In one brilliant maneuver, Hannibal proved that genius could overpower even the mightiest empire. 5. The Siege of Alesia, 52 BC. In the year 52 BC, the fate of Gaul and the rise of one of history's most legendary leaders hinged on a hilltop fortress called Alesia. Inside its massive walls stood Vercingetorix, the charismatic war chief who had united the Gallic tribes against Roman rule. Outside, surrounding the fortress like a tightening noose, stood Julius Caesar and his battle-hardened legions. This was not just a siege. It was a duel between two masters of war, a man defending his homeland and another determined to carve his path to immortality. Knowing that a direct assault would bleed his army dry, Caesar chose something far more audacious. He ordered his soldiers to build a wall around Alesia, then another wall facing outward. The Romans had trapped their enemy, while preparing for an enemy of their own. Inside the fortress, famine ravaged the Gauls. Outside, Caesar's men labored day and night, constructing a ring of trenches, towers, traps, and fortifications stretching for miles, a masterpiece of ancient engineering. But Vercingetorix had one final hope: a massive Gallic relief army, perhaps 250,000 strong, marched to break the Roman stranglehold. What followed was one of the most dramatic two-front battles in history. The Gauls attacked from the outside, Vercingetorix charged from within, and Caesar stood trapped between two armies, outnumbered more than 10-1. Yet the Roman legions held firm. Their disciplined formations and defensive structures turned the battlefield into a brutal choke point. At the critical moment, Caesar personally led a cavalry assault that shattered the Gallic relief forces. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix knew the truth. The fight was over. He rode out from the fortress, wearing his finest armor, dismounted, and laid his weapons at Caesar's feet, a symbolic surrender that marked the fall of Gaul. Alesia was not just a Roman victory. It was the moment Julius Caesar secured his legacy and paved the way for the rise of the Roman Empire.
6. The Battle of the Metaurus, 207 BC, the day Rome saved itself. The Battle of the Metaurus is one of the least talked about yet most decisive battles in ancient history, a clash that determined whether Rome would survive or fall to the Carthaginian war machine. While Hannibal ravaged Italy for years, it was his brother, Hasdrubal Barca, who came closest to finishing Rome entirely. If the two brothers had joined forces, nothing could have stopped Carthage from crushing Rome. And in 207 BC, Hasdrubal was marching south to do exactly that. Hasdrubal had crossed the Alps with a seasoned army, repeating Hannibal's daring route but with far fewer losses. Rome panicked. Two undefeatable Carthaginian generals, united on Italian soil, it would be the end of the Republic. In a desperate gamble, Rome took the risky step of intercepting Hasdrubal before he could reach his brother. Roman consuls Gaius Claudius Nero and Marcus Livius Salinator coordinated a brilliant plan. Nero, knowing that facing Hannibal alone was suicide, secretly marched his elite troops north, leaving a skeleton force behind to trick Hannibal into thinking he was still there. In one of the most daring forced marches in Roman history, Nero's men traveled over 250 kilometers in just a few days to link up with Livius near the Metaurus River. Hasdrubal, realizing too late that he was facing two Roman armies instead of one, attempted to retreat, but the battlefield terrain trapped his forces. What followed was a brutal and chaotic fight. The Romans overwhelmed the Carthaginian lines, and Hasdrubal, seeing the battle lost, charged into the fray and died fighting with his men. Rome's victory at Metaurus didn't just stop an invasion, it shattered Carthage's last hope. Hannibal, upon receiving his brother's severed head thrown into his camp, understood everything. The dream of conquering Rome had died that day. Metaurus stands as the turning point of the Second Punic War, the moment Rome seized back its destiny and ensured its future dominance of the ancient world.
7. The Battle of Zama, 202 BCE, Hannibal's final stand. The Battle of Zama was not just a clash between two armies, it was the explosive finale to one of history's greatest rivalries. After nearly 2 decades of terrorizing Rome across Italy, Hannibal Barca was finally forced to return home to defend Carthage itself. Waiting for him was a rising Roman star, Scipio Africanus, a general who had learned from Hannibal's tactics and improved upon them. What happened at Zama would decide the fate of the ancient Mediterranean, Rome or Carthage. Only one could dominate. Hannibal arrived at Zama with his legendary battlefield mind, but not his legendary army. The veterans who had marched with him over the Alps were gone. Instead, he commanded a mix of inexperienced recruits, mercenaries, and a few hardened African troops. Scipio had one more surprise. He ordered his cavalry, led by Massinissa of Numidia, to circle back after routing the Carthaginian horsemen. They struck Hannibal's rear just as the Roman infantry pushed from the front. Surrounded and outmaneuvered, Hannibal's army broke. Zama was the end of Carthaginian power. Hannibal survived, but his dream of crushing Rome died on that battlefield. Rome emerged as the undisputed superpower of the ancient world, and history was forever changed. 8. The Battle of Actium, 31 BCE, the clash that ended a republic. The Battle of Actium was not just a naval fight, it was the moment the Roman Republic died and the Roman Empire was born. On one side stood Octavian, the ambitious heir of Julius Caesar. On the other was Mark Antony, once Rome's greatest general, now allied with Cleopatra VII, the powerful queen of Egypt. Their conflict had thrown the Roman world into chaos, and at Actium everything would be decided: who would rule, and who would be erased from history. Antony and Cleopatra commanded a massive fleet, far larger and heavier than Octavian's. Their ships, built like floating fortresses, were devastating in close combat. But they were slow, too slow, and the winds on the Ionian Sea that morning favored Octavian. This was more than a defeat. It shattered Antony's reputation, destroyed his army's morale, and ended the last challenge to Octavian's rule. Within a year, Antony and Cleopatra were dead, Egypt was annexed, and Octavian proclaimed himself Augustus, Rome's first emperor. Actium reshaped the ancient world. It ended centuries of republican politics and ushered in an era of emperors, expansion, and absolute power. The Mediterranean became a Roman lake, and the empire that would dominate history for the next 400 years was born from the waves off Actium. 9. The Battle of Tours, 732 CE, when Europe stood on the edge of transformation. The Battle of Tours, also known as the Battle of Poitiers, is one of the most pivotal, yet often misunderstood clashes in world history. In 732 CE, Europe stood at a crossroads. The Umayyad Caliphate, one of the most powerful empires on earth, had swept across North Africa, conquered Spain, and pushed deep into the heart of Western Europe. City after city fell as their armies advanced. Nothing seemed capable of stopping them until they reached Tours. Here they met Charles Martel, a Frankish leader known as the Hammer. Charles was not a king, not a noble hero with divine authority. He was a hardened commander who had spent years uniting fractured tribes and beating back raiders. Abdul Rahman was killed in the chaos, and without leadership, the Umayyad army retreated under the cover of night. The next morning, Charles Martel walked onto an empty battlefield. The invaders had vanished. Tours was not just a military victory. It halted the northward expansion of one of the world's most dominant empires and preserved the cultural trajectory of Europe. Many historians believe that had Tours ended differently, the entire religious and political landscape of Europe, and perhaps the world, could have been transformed. 10. The Battle of Ain Jalut, 1260 CE, the first major defeat of the Mongol Empire. For over a century, the Mongol Empire had been unstoppable, a storm that swept across continents, shattering kingdoms and burning civilizations to ash. Cities from China to Baghdad had fallen before their horsemen. No army had ever beaten them in a full-scale battle, until Ain Jalut. In 1260 CE, the Mongols, under the brutal leadership of Kitbuka, invaded the Levant after destroying Baghdad and crushing the Abbasid Caliphate. Their advance seemed inevitable, but in Egypt, a new power was rising: the Mamluks, former slave soldiers who had seized control of the kingdom and turned it into a military powerhouse. Their ruler, Sultan Qutuz, understood one thing clearly: if the Mongols were not stopped here, Egypt and the rest of North Africa would fall next. Qutuz personally led a direct assault, shouting "Wa Islama" as he plunged into the fray. Kitbuka was captured and executed, and for the first time in their empire's history, the Mongol advance was decisively halted. Ain Jalut was more than just a victory. It proved that the Mongols were not invincible. It saved the Middle East from total devastation and preserved cultures, cities, and societies that would have otherwise been erased. The battle marked the beginning of the Mongols' decline in the West, a turning point that reshaped the destiny of the medieval world. These were 10 brutal ancient battles that changed the world, brought to you by ImmortalChronos, where the past is never forgotten, and history's greatest warriors live forever. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to witness more epic battles and legendary stories from the ancient world. Tell us in the comments, which battle shocked you the most? Step boldly into history and join the Legion at ImmortalChronos.